How you doing? You all right? As Becky said, I work for a company called Wirehive. I'm the marketing manager. Wirehive, we are a digital infrastructure company and a consultancy, which basically means we own really big, powerful computers in data centers across the country, and we provide the hosting for agencies like Reflect to build their product on. That's all I'm going to say about Wirehive, because that's not what I'm really going to talk about. You're probably all a little bored about being told what marketing is and looking at another PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do is try and tell you it from a little bit more of a personal perspective. So we're going to start with the most important bit, which is clearly me. There's a bit of a thing at Wirehive that I've done all the jobs. And it's kind of true, in a way. I've done a lot of different things. I left school with one GCSE, a B, so it wasn't even an A. And I ended up working as a labourer for my friend's dad's building company. But I wasn't happy to do that. Clearly, this isn't me, by the way. Most of the pictures are me, or at least related to me. I managed to talk my way in to nurse training at Bradford and Airedale College of Health. 3 years later, Bradford and Airedale College of Health didn't exist anymore. It was part of Bradford University, and I qualified as a nurse with a degree-level qualification from a university after having left school with one GCSE. I worked as a nurse for about 10 years. I fairly rapidly progressed up the ranks of nursing. I ended up in professional development. I was an associate lecturer at 2 universities, and I taught for the Royal College of Surgeons. If you're interested in the story, undiagnosed ADHD is exactly why that happened. I've done a lot of other things. I'm a martial artist. I've been training in martial arts since I was a child. I used to run a very successful club in Guildford. You'll find out why I no longer do fairly soon. I've traveled all over the world. People pay me to go and teach seminars in various places. I've written books on it, I've made videos on it, and just to boast a little bit, I'm a 4th degree black belt. So that's another thing I do that I've done for a living. I'm not going to take you through every job because we'll be here all day. But just to give you a bit of an idea, when I left nursing, I had a slight change of career, and I became a historical bladesmith, completely self-taught, and I traveled around Europe selling historical replicas, knives, daggers, swords, at medieval reenactment events and Ren fairs and that kind of thing. Absolutely fantastic life, terrible living. But you get to live in ruined castles around Europe, so it was pretty cool. I still do about that. But throughout all of this, I've had one constant interest. You've probably noticed that I'm horribly, horribly old. This isn't actually the one, but my first computer was one of these. The sharp-eyed among you will probably see that that is a Sinclair ZX81. It was released in 1981. I was 8. I got one of these, and I plugged it into the back of the television, and I was instantly hooked. It's a terrible computer. It had 1K of RAM. To put that into context, I have a Samsung S8 in my pocket, which has 64 million times as much memory as that computer has. But I loved it all the same. You had to, if you wanted to play a game, you had to type in the code for the game by hand. You couldn't move the cursor, so if you made a mistake, you had to delete everything back to the mistake and then retype it. But I still loved it. I moved on from there to a BBC microcomputer. You see these in museums now, which is a bit depressing. My mum still has our BBC micro in a cupboard somewhere. That had 32K. That was 32 times as powerful as my ZX81. Later, the internet became a thing. This is a horrible, horrible website, but it's the first one I built. And I think this was taken, I think this was 1999. So whilst it's a horrible website, I'm sure it's older than most of the people in this room. So it's no real surprise that when I decided I wanted to be a little bit more serious about having a career, I turned to digital, specifically digital marketing. It's a pretty nice job, to be honest. I'll give you an idea of what my average day was like. I get up in the morning. I tend to get up quite early. I'd make breakfast for the kids. I've got lots of kids. My wife works late. She works evenings, so she tends not to get up as early. So I'd get them ready for school, take them, drop them off at school. I'd maybe go to the gym, and then I'd go and sit in a coffee shop somewhere, fire up the laptop, get a nice coffee, do some work, maybe go for lunch with a friend. I'd pick the kids up from school, take them home. By the time they'd gone to bed, I'd get the laptop out again and I'd start working again. I could choose when I worked, and that's a really important thing. You're entirely your own boss, but that means it's not all happy, because as a freelancer, you work entirely by yourself, which means that you have to do everything. So I'm sure when you've listened to some of the other people from agencies talking about what they do, they've got different people doing different things. They've got SEO specialists, they've got content creators, they've got accounts teams, they've got salesmen. You have to be all of those people. If you have no work, it's your fault. You have to go out and get it. If you're busy doing the work, you're not bringing in any more work, so that when you finish the job, suddenly you've got nothing. And what that means is that sometimes you can wake up in the morning and find 20 grand in your bank account that wasn't there when you went to bed. And don't get me wrong, that's a lovely feeling. But sometimes you get up in the morning and that person who promised they'd pay you hasn't paid you, and you don't know how you're going to put petrol in the car to take the kids to school. And that's not quite so good a feeling. But it does offer a lot of advantages. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit of a story and show you why working freelance turned out to be an amazing thing for me. Edward Charles Sidney Austwick, born on the 12th of February 2013, known affectionately as Ned. Ned is my youngest. He was the smiliest baby you've ever seen. He had this ridiculous grin all the time. And whatever happened, he was smiling. Didn't really cry. Wonderful child, to be honest. But about 18 months old, Ned started limping. He'd not long learned to walk, so it took us a while to spot. But one day, he refused to walk at all. So we took him to the GP, and the GP had no idea what was going on, couldn't see anything obvious, referred us to the hospital. They did some tests, said, "Oh, it's fine, it'll settle down," sent him home. 6 or 8 weeks of going backwards and forwards between the hospital and the GP and back. They did an MRI, and on the MRI, they discovered, this got a laser pointer on it.
Yes, there is a laser.
Yeah. Well, you can see fairly clearly. That's an MRI of a pelvis, and that bit in the red circle is a massive tumour in Ned's pelvis. Further tests showed that he had several other tumours in other bones throughout his body. He was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer called Langerhans cell histiocytosis, which, as you can imagine, meant that our life pretty much fell apart. He had chemo for 15 months. Now, I'm sure that some of you in this room have had personal experience of cancer, whether it's you or whether it's family members. You'll already know what I'm going to say. Chemotherapy does two things. Firstly, and most importantly, it gets rid of cancer a lot of the time. But it also has a lot of fairly negative side effects. To treat Ned, what they had to do was to put a little central line in, so a tube that went from the side of his chest into his heart, so they could give the chemotherapy directly into his heart. It would instantly be flooded through his body, and it would do its job. The other thing that does, sadly, is it completely destroys your immune system. So what we had was a 2-year-old who was vastly more likely to get an infection than he was beforehand. And if he got an infection, clearly it would be a serious one because it would be directly in his heart. But he had no immune system to speak of because that had been destroyed by the chemotherapy. Now, you can see he was still kind of smiley. This is Ned with wiggly in. This is what he called his central line. You can see it on the side of his chest. About every 2 to 3 weeks, for 15 months, Ned was rushed into hospital with a temperature. And what that meant is that I couldn't really hold down any regular work. But thankfully, I was a freelancer. So what I did is I ditched those clients that were particularly time-consuming or didn't pay me very well or I had to chase for money. And I focused on the jobs that I knew I could do well, that would make some money. And I worked in the middle of the night, and I completely changed the way I worked in order to be able to deal with Ned's cancer. For the record, he's fine. He's been clear for 3 years now. This is him with his partners in crime, his big brother Jake, and his even bigger sister Isabel. If you've spotted the fact that they're the same names as Twilight, we didn't realize until somebody pointed that out to us. So yeah, sorry. So once Ned was better and life had settled down, I kind of decided that I was a bit fed up of being a freelancer. It's quite stressful, and more than anything, it's really quite a lonely existence because you aren't part of a team. I deliberately avoided contract working because I did that when I was nursing, and I hate it, to be honest. So I decided to get a job, a proper job, for the first time in years. And I ended up at a company called Wirehive. This is a slightly better website than the one I showed you earlier on that I built. I didn't build this one, but part of my job is looking after it. I do all the things that you've heard about. I do SEO, I do email campaigns, I do content creation, written and video, all that kind of stuff. I do all that in-house. And what this kind of means is that because we're not outsourcing it, it's my project. I own the whole thing, and I can take as long as it takes to get it right. I'm not constantly getting on the phone to an agency, or from the other perspective, I'm not sitting in an agency with a client getting on the phone saying, why isn't this ready? Because it's all me. I'd have to ring myself. And whilst I've done that to leave messages so I don't forget stuff, it's a bit of a silly thing, so don't do that. But I get to do other things as well. Becky mentioned the awards that we run, the Wirehive 100 Awards. We aren't an agency, but we provide infrastructure services specifically for agencies. So we also run a set of awards for agencies to showcase their work. For the last 2 years, we've live streamed the awards. This year, we stepped it up a little bit more, and I went round and interviewed people live at the awards, and this was at the O2 Guildhall in Southampton, what, a month ago? Is it a month ago now? It's about that. Got to hang out with Ed Byrne, which was kind of cool. Other than that, it was a horribly stressful night for me. Everybody else seemed to have a great time, but not me, because I was organising it and making sure it ran smoothly. But there's a lot of other stuff that goes on. This is my desk. You can see this is slightly different to the desk that I showed you when I was freelance. There's a few things here that you might have spotted. The first is that just in the bottom left, there's a trophy. One of the cool things that happens at Wirehive is every quarter, so every 3 months, everyone in the company votes to say who they think the most awesome person in the company is. And that person gets a shiny trophy and an even shinier 100 quid to spend at Amazon, which is kind of lovely. And when you win it, it's pretty awesome. You'll notice that there are 2 keyboards and 2 mice on that desk, which you've probably spotted and thought was a bit odd. What that basically is there for is because I can plug the laptop into the dock, and that drives the 3 monitors, and that also has a keyboard and a mouse attached. We've not figured out how to make the mouse and the keyboard work on 2 different machines, because under the desk is a really very powerful desktop machine, which I use for editing video content. If you've done any of that, you know you need a fairly powerful machine to render video. I can run the same 3 screens, but I can't run the same keyboard. Don't make that public, because we're supposed to be tech experts. The there's also a ukulele, because, well, you know, why not? So effectively, I've got the buying power. Ooh, that almost went wrong. I've got the buying power of a big, successful tech company behind me now. So if I need something, I get it. If I'm editing video and I don't like the software I'm using and I want something else, we buy it. As a freelancer, I couldn't do that. I couldn't afford to spend hundreds of pounds on software that might be slightly better. I'd always use the cheapest solution. So this is kind of cool. We do movie nights regularly at the company. We all get together, we get some takeout in, buy some beer, sit around, watch a film. And usually what happens is we put up a movie poster. You've probably noticed that that's not actually the Gladiator poster, because they Photoshop somebody from the company into a poster. It's a bit of fun. We have pumpkin carving competitions. This was my entry. Can you believe this didn't win? Horrified, to be honest. It was clearly a fix. But there's other things. You know I'm a martial artist. In April, I was competing in an obscure form of submission wrestling, and I fairly spectacularly messed up a throw. And both the guy who I was throwing and I landed on the side of my knee. I went to A&E and was told it was fine, just sprained, it'll settle down, they'll refer me for some physio. Thankfully, they didn't refer me for any physio, and 6 weeks later, I still couldn't really walk. So I realized at that point that I had company healthcare insurance. So I fired up the Bupa policy, went off and saw a world-renowned knee specialist who MRI'd it, showed me a lump of bone that was supposed to be on the end of my femur, and then screwed it back in place. Not then, he did take me off and anaesthetize me first. What that meant is that I couldn't walk for quite a long time. Now, had I been freelancing, I'd have been in really big trouble, because I needed to get out, I needed to see people, I needed to bring in business. Because I was working for a cloud consultancy, all I had to do was fire up my laptop and I was at work. So not only did the company pay for me to have the operation that I needed to fix my knee, but because I was working for that company, I was able to carry on working and carry on earning a living. And I've still got a little bit of a limp. I'm no longer teaching martial arts currently. If I ever get properly better, I'll get back to it. But the most important thing about the company is the people. You remember me saying that it's a bit lonely working by yourself? Now, in some ways it's great, because all the successes are your successes if you work by yourself, but so are all the failures. But this is the team. This was us on our annual end-of-year party. End of business year, not end of actual year. We went out in London, went to the Star Wars VR experience, The Void, and then went out for a meal and some drinks afterwards. Interestingly, that's cropped out my crutches, which were at the side of the picture, because I was struggling to walk then. But these guys are what makes Wirehive the place that it is. There's all sorts there. There's the company founders, finance guys, we've got system architects, account managers, me, obviously. It's a really lovely place to work because it's about the people. And that's pretty much all I really want to say. But before I stop, I kind of want to say two things to you. And this is a little bit inspired by Dan, who's giving you tips. I want to tell you two things, because I'm old enough to have learned these things. Bad stuff is going to happen to you. You'll cope. It'll be fine. And whatever decisions you make now will change your life, but they don't have to be forever. You can change track. If it's not working for you, you can do something else. So follow your heart, do what you want to do, and if it doesn't work out, do something else. It's all good. Thank you for listening to me.